In the vast pages of world history, few relationships have been as complex, layered, and impactful as that between the United States of America and the United Kingdom. Their story is not just a tale of nations, it is a saga of power, rebellion, empire, and the shaping of the modern world. To understand the untold history of these two superpowers, we must go back to the days when America was not yet a nation, but a cluster of colonies under British control. In the 17th century, when English settlers crossed the Atlantic in search of opportunity, they carried with them the traditions, laws, and culture of Britain. These early colonies, stretching along the eastern seaboard, grew under the protective shadow of the British Crown, and for more than a century, the bond between Britain and its colonies was strong. Britain provided military defense and economic ties, while the colonies supplied raw materials and markets for British goods. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. The American colonies developed their own identity, distinct from their motherland. They experienced more freedom, more land, and a spirit of independence that clashed with Britain's strict control. The turning point came in the 18th century, when Britain, burdened by debts from wars in Europe, began imposing heavy taxes on the colonies. The colonists saw this not just as unfair, but as a violation of their rights as Englishmen. The cry of no taxation without representation echoed across the Atlantic. Britain viewed the colonies as subjects who owed loyalty and taxes, but the colonists believed they deserved a voice in the decisions that governed their lives. What followed was a clash that would alter the destiny of both nations. The American Revolution erupted in 1775, pitting a relatively small colonial force against the might of the British Empire. Few in London believed the colonies could succeed. Britain's navy ruled the seas, and its army was among the strongest in the world. Yet, the spirit of independence, combined with strategic alliances, gave the revolutionaries an edge. France, eager to weaken its old rival Britain, supported the American cause, and the conflict escalated into a global struggle. By 1783, Britain was forced to recognize the independence of the United States. It was a humiliating defeat for the empire, but also the birth of a nation that would one day surpass even Britain in power. In the aftermath, the relationship between the two countries was marked by distrust and rivalry. Britain still viewed America as a rebellious child, while the United States sought to distance itself from European entanglements. Yet geography, trade, and shared culture kept them connected. Tensions flared again in the War of 1812. When the United States accused Britain of interfering with its trade and impressing American sailors into the Royal Navy, the war was bloody and inconclusive, but it reaffirmed America's sovereignty. Washington, D.C. was burned, yet the young republic stood firm. Britain focused on its wars with Napoleon in Europe, eventually sought peace, and the two nations settled into an uneasy coexistence. While Britain expanded its global empire throughout the 19th century, becoming the world's greatest colonial power, the United States focused on its own growth. The vast frontier, rich resources, and waves of immigrants fueled America's rise. The two nations, though separated by the Atlantic, mirrored each other in ambition. Britain ruled with monarchy and empire, America with democracy and expansion. Yet both believed in their destiny to lead the world. Despite their shared language and heritage, rivalry lingered. America resented British influence, while Britain often underestimated the potential of its former colony. But trade between them grew, and so did cultural exchange. By the late 19th century, the balance of power was shifting. Britain, though still mighty, was stretched thin by its vast empire. America, on the other hand, was emerging as an industrial powerhouse, its economy booming, its influence expanding. The Spanish-American War of 1898 marked America's entry onto the world stage as a colonial power, echoing the path Britain had taken centuries earlier. This was the beginning of a new dynamic, where America was no longer a rebellious child but a rising rival. Yet history has a way of bringing rivals together in times of crisis. When the First World War broke out in 1914, Britain faced existential threats from Germany. At first, the United States remained neutral, hesitant to entangle itself in European wars. But as the conflict dragged on, with German submarines sinking American ships and secret plots revealed, the United States entered the war in 1917. American troops and resources tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. Britain, once the master, now relied on the strength of its former colony. The war marked the beginning of what came to be called the special relationship. It was a partnership born of necessity, but it revealed how intertwined their destinies had become. The interwar years were a time of adjustment. Britain, battered by the costs of the First World War, struggled to maintain its empire, while America enjoyed the prosperity of the Roaring Twenties, only to face the Great Depression in the 1930s. Yet even in these hard times, their paths crossed again. As the world edged toward another catastrophic conflict, the question loomed: would America and Britain stand together once more? The Second World War would cement their bond in ways neither could have imagined. In 1940, Britain stood alone against Nazi Germany, its cities bombed, its empire threatened. Winston Churchill, Britain's resolute leader, reached across the Atlantic for help. Though America was still officially neutral, President Franklin D. Roosevelt responded. The Lend-Lease program provided Britain with ships, weapons, and supplies, a lifeline that kept the nation in the fight. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, America entered the war, and the two nations became the cornerstone of the Allied forces. Their generals and soldiers fought side by side in Europe, Africa, and Asia. The partnership was not always smooth, with disagreements over strategy and post-war planning, but together they achieved victory. By 1945, however, the world had changed forever. Britain, though victorious, was exhausted and financially weakened. Its empire, once stretching across the globe, began to crumble. The United States, untouched at home and enriched by war production, emerged as the new global leader. The torch of superpower status had passed, almost imperceptibly, from Britain to America. Yet, rather than enemies, they became partners in a new era defined by the Cold War. This first part of their untold history reveals a journey from colony to superpower, from bitter enemies to indispensable allies. The story is one of transformation, resilience, and the shifting tides of power. America and Britain, once locked in conflict, had forged a bond that would shape the second half of the 20th century and beyond. But this was only the beginning, for the post-war world would bring new challenges, hidden tensions, and a redefinition of what it meant to be superpowers in a rapidly changing world. The end of the Second World War was both a triumph and a reckoning for Britain. The Union Jack still flew over colonies on every continent, but the empire was now a shadow of its former self. The financial strain of 6 years of war, the devastation of cities, and the sheer exhaustion of the British people meant that the sun was beginning to set on the British Empire. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States emerged not only victorious but transformed. Its economy was booming, its industries had become the arsenal of democracy, and its influence extended into every corner of the globe. America now stood on the threshold of a new era, one in which it would dominate world affairs. The special relationship between the two countries, forged in the fires of war, entered a new phase. Britain, though diminished, still held immense prestige, its culture, institutions, and diplomacy respected worldwide. America, now the undisputed superpower of the West, needed Britain as a bridge to Europe, a trusted ally, and a partner in shaping the post-war order. The creation of the United Nations, the Bretton Woods economic system, and the new international institutions all reflected this partnership. Yet beneath the surface, there was an unspoken reality. Britain was now the junior partner. This shift became clear in the late 1940s as the Cold War began. The Soviet Union, once an ally, became the new adversary, and the world divided into two camps. For America, containing communism became the central mission, and Britain aligned itself closely with Washington. The Marshall Plan, an American initiative to rebuild Europe, included Britain as one of its key beneficiaries. American aid flowed into the British economy, preventing collapse and ensuring recovery. But this aid came with a reminder that Britain could no longer stand alone. The symbolic passing of the torch was evident in moments like the Berlin airlift of 1948-49, when American planes, alongside British ones, kept West Berlin supplied during a Soviet blockade. America's scale, resources, and power were unmatched. Britain still played a role, but it was clear who now led the free world. The establishment of NATO in 1949 further bound the two nations together, with Britain eager to maintain influence by remaining America's closest ally. Yet, Britain's decline was visible in the dismantling of its empire. India, the crown jewel, had gained independence in 1947, followed by a wave of decolonization across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean. For centuries, Britain had been the greatest imperial power, but now its colonies demanded freedom, and maintaining control was no longer possible. America, though once a colony itself, supported this wave of independence, seeing it as a way to win allies in the Cold War. Still, Washington respected Britain's global experience, and often the two nations coordinated their policies. The 1950s and 1960s highlighted the complexities of this relationship. On one hand, there was deep cooperation. American and British scientists worked together on nuclear weapons, sharing secrets that few other allies ever received. Culturally, Britain influenced America through music, literature, and intellectual thought, while America influenced Britain with its movies, technology, and lifestyle. On the other hand, moments of tension revealed the limits of the partnership. The most dramatic example came in 1956 during the Suez Crisis, when Egypt's leader Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal. Britain, alongside France and Israel, launched a military operation to regain control. They did so without fully informing Washington, believing they could act as they had in the days of empire. But President Dwight D. Eisenhower opposed the invasion. Fearing it would drive Arab nations toward the Soviet Union, America used its financial leverage to force Britain to withdraw. The humiliation was immense. For many historians, Suez marked the true end of Britain's role as a global superpower and cemented America's dominance. From then on, London understood that no major international action could succeed without Washington's support. Despite such tensions, the bond deepened. In the 1960s, as the Cold War intensified, Britain stood firmly by America. When the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan gave unwavering support to President John F. Kennedy. Later, Britain allowed American nuclear weapons to be stationed on its soil, making the alliance not just political but existential. The two countries became entwined in intelligence sharing through the Five Eyes network, a secretive arrangement that endures to this day. Culturally too, the relationship flourished. The so-called British invasion of music, led by the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, swept across America in the 1960s, reshaping global popular culture. At the same time, American television, films, and consumer products became ubiquitous in Britain. The two societies, though distinct, were becoming more intertwined than ever before. As the Cold War moved into the 1970s and 1980s, new challenges tested the alliance. America's involvement in Vietnam divided opinion in Britain, with many questioning Washington's strategy. Yet Britain, though cautious, never fully broke from America's side. The election of Margaret Thatcher in 1979 marked a new chapter. A strong partnership with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s became one of the most famous examples of the special relationship. United by a shared belief in free markets, anti-communism, and a tough stance against the Soviet Union, the Reagan-Thatcher era reinvigorated the bond. Together they shaped policies that helped bring about the end of the Cold War. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 left America as the sole superpower. Britain, though diminished, had found its role as America's closest ally and most trusted partner. The Gulf War of 1991 saw British troops fighting alongside Americans in the liberation of Kuwait, showcasing the military cooperation that had become a hallmark of their relationship. But with the Cold War over, new questions emerged. What would this relationship mean in a world no longer defined by the East-West divide? For Britain, the challenge was clear: how to remain relevant in a unipolar world dominated by America. For the United States, the question was whether it still needed Britain as much as before. Yet history, culture, and shared values ensured that the bond remained strong. The 1990s saw globalization accelerate, and both nations benefited from economic growth and technological change. At the same time, they faced new threats: terrorism, regional conflicts, and the challenge of maintaining order in a rapidly changing world. The seeds were being sown for the next great test of their alliance, one that would come with shocking suddenness at the dawn of the new millennium. As the 20th century closed, the story of the United States and the United Kingdom had evolved from colony and empire, to rivals, to partners, to near inseparable allies. But the events of September 11, 2001, would prove that the special relationship was not just a phrase, but a living, breathing reality. America had been attacked on its own soil, and Britain stood resolutely at its side. The next chapter of their untold history would reveal how deeply intertwined their destinies had become, and how their choices would shape not just their own nations but the world itself. The morning of September 11, 2001, changed everything. As the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center collapsed in New York and smoke rose from the Pentagon, the United States was shaken to its core. For the first time since Pearl Harbor, America had been struck directly on its own soil. The shock was not just American. It reverberated across the world. And in London, the response was immediate and unwavering. Prime Minister Tony Blair stood firmly beside President George W. Bush, declaring that Britain would stand shoulder to shoulder with America in the fight against terrorism. The special relationship, tested across centuries, was about to face one of its greatest trials. The wars that followed in Afghanistan and Iraq defined the first decade of the new millennium for both countries. In Afghanistan, British and American troops fought side by side to dismantle the Taliban regime and pursue al-Qaeda. For a time, the mission seemed clear and justified. But the 2003 invasion of Iraq became far more controversial. While Washington argued that Saddam Hussein possessed weapons of mass destruction, many in Britain and around the world questioned the evidence. Still, Blair committed British forces, believing in loyalty to America and the moral argument for intervention. The war divided opinion within Britain, sparking mass protests. Yet once again the UK aligned itself with the US in a moment of global consequence. These conflicts revealed both the strength and the strain of the relationship. On the battlefield, cooperation was seamless, with soldiers sharing strategies, intelligence, and risks. Politically, however, Blair paid a heavy price. Many Britons came to view the war as a mistake, and Blair's close ties to Bush damaged his legacy at home. Yet the episode also showed how deeply intertwined the two nations had become in matters of security and foreign policy. Neither acted entirely alone. Their fates were tied together. As the years passed, new leaders emerged. In America, Barack Obama rose to the presidency in 2008, bringing a different style of leadership. In Britain, Gordon Brown, then David Cameron, took the helm. The partnership shifted in tone but not in substance. Obama and Cameron worked together on global issues, from climate change to the global financial crisis that erupted in 2008. Once again, the two economies, among the largest in the world, leaned on each other for stability. Their coordination reflected the enduring reality. When America and Britain aligned, they could shape the world's response to crises. But the 2010s also brought profound changes. The rise of new powers such as China, the resurgence of Russia, and the growing complexity of global challenges forced both nations to rethink their roles. Britain, still one of the world's most influential states, faced an identity crisis. The Brexit referendum of 2016, in which the UK voted to leave the European Union, redefined its position in the world. Many in Washington worried that Brexit would weaken Britain's global influence, but others saw it as an opportunity to strengthen bilateral ties. The idea of a new US-UK trade deal became a symbol of how the special relationship might adapt to changing realities. Meanwhile, America itself was undergoing shifts. The presidency of Donald Trump challenged traditional alliances, as he questioned NATO, criticized global institutions, and took a more transactional approach to foreign policy. For Britain, maintaining its closeness to Washington under these circumstances was delicate. Yet, even in moments of tension, the underlying partnership endured. Intelligence sharing, military cooperation, and cultural exchange remained constants, regardless of who occupied the White House or Downing Street. Culturally, the bond between the two nations flourished in ways that transcended politics. Hollywood films dominated British cinemas, while British actors and musicians found global fame in America, from Harry Potter to Game of Thrones. British creativity reached global audiences, while American technology companies like Apple, Google, and Facebook reshaped British daily life. The blending of cultures showed how deeply the two societies were connected, sometimes blurring the line between them. The fight against terrorism remained a shared mission. The killing of Osama bin Laden in 2011 was celebrated on both sides of the Atlantic, a reminder of years of joint intelligence work. British and American agencies continued to operate in close harmony, preventing attacks and sharing secrets at a level unmatched between any other two countries. This trust, built over decades, became one of the most valuable aspects of their partnership. As the 2020s began, the world faced new challenges that demanded cooperation. The COVID-19 pandemic tested governments everywhere, and once again the United States and the United Kingdom coordinated responses, sharing research, medical resources, and eventually vaccines. The Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine, developed in Britain, became part of the global fight, while American pharmaceutical companies produced their own breakthroughs. The crisis showed that science and innovation, like politics and war, were arenas where the partnership mattered. Yet perhaps the greatest challenge came not from disease, but from the shifting balance of global power. China's rise as an economic and military giant raised questions about the future of Western dominance. Russia's aggression in Ukraine reignited the specter of conflict in Europe. In each of these cases, America and Britain stood side by side, imposing sanctions, supporting allies, and reaffirming their role as defenders of a certain vision of the world order. Once again, the echoes of history were clear. When the stakes were high, these two nations turned to each other. The story of the United States and the United Kingdom is more than politics and war. It is also a story of shared values, common heritage, and mutual influence. Both nations see themselves as champions of democracy, freedom, and the rule of law, even when they have fallen short of those ideals. Both have projected their power not only through armies and navies but through ideas, culture, and institutions. The English language spoken around the world is a symbol of their shared influence. Looking back, it is astonishing to think how far they have come, from the bitter wars of independence, to the flames of Washington, D.C. in 1814. To the uneasy rivalries of empire, they have traveled a long road. They fought together against fascism, stood united against communism, and confronted the challenges of terrorism and global crises. Theirs is a bond that has adapted to changing times, surviving leaders with different visions, enduring scandals and setbacks, yet always re-emerging stronger. Today, as the world enters an uncertain era marked by technological change, climate challenges, and shifting power dynamics, the United States and the United Kingdom continue to stand at the center of global affairs. Their relationship is no longer one of empire and colony, nor of master and apprentice, but of partners bound by history and necessity. It is a relationship built not just on treaties or political deals, but on trust, familiarity, and shared destiny. The untold history of these two superpowers is not a closed book, but a living story still being written. Every new crisis, every new alliance, every new cultural wave adds another chapter. In the 21st century, as in centuries past, when America and Britain act together, the world listens. Their power may ebb and flow, but their bond remains one of the most extraordinary in human history. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is that two nations, once bitter enemies divided by rebellion and war, could transform into allies whose cooperation has shaped the modern world. The story of the United States and the United Kingdom is not only the story of their rise, but the story of our shared global past, present, and future.